Hello. What I'd like to do right now is to introduce the team from the University of Pittsburgh, Sean and Rachel.
Hello, my name is Dr. Sean Bridgen. I am currently serving as the Associate Director for External and Institutional Partnerships at NACADA, the Global Community of Academic Advising. And right before I came to NACADA, I was working as the Director of Academic Advising in the newly founded School of Computing and Information at the University of Pittsburgh, where I was the first director.
Hi, my name is Rachel Parks. I'm an academic advisor at the School of Computing and Information at the University of Pittsburgh, and I'm currently serving as the acting director of academic advising.
Great. It's so nice having you both here today. I look forward to our continued conversations. Could you tell us a little bit more about your advising unit, your department, and also why you started using this rubric?
Would you like to start that, Rachel?
Absolutely. Yes, so the School of Computing and Information was founded in 2017, but in 2019, we matriculated our first year class. So as of 2019, we are a 4-year school. So with the start of the new school, we developed a full advising center so that we're staffed by full-time professional advisors, and each student is assigned to a specific advisor who they work with for their entire 4 years at the university. This came out of a previous model where our two departments lived in separate schools and students were advised either by an administrative advisor or a faculty member. Mm-hmm. But now we work with primary role advisors for all 4 years. And part of this model is that the advisors teach several sections of a first-year seminar course to students each fall, and we set it up such that once a student signs up for a section of first-year seminar, we then assign them to that advisor. So we get to really build that relationship right from the beginning. You see your advisor every single week for that first semester, and then at least once a semester from there until graduation.
Wonderful. Thank you. So, Sean, you introduced the rubric notion to your team, and why was the motivation behind that, and how did you approach that with your team?
Yeah, so whenever I was hired to start this new advising center, I wanted to base it on the things I was learning as an EAA fellow and all the things I had learned being a faculty member at the NACADA Summer Institute and many other things I had learned from NACADA. And I found this rubric to be a very, I would say a simple way, but also a comprehensive way to make sure we are kind of covering all of the main pieces or all of the pillars as we kind of rolled out our advising center. There were lots of things discussed. There were lots of ideas thrown around. There were lots of concepts and plans written. But I wanted to make sure we were constantly tying it back to something where we could have a kind of I would call it like a neutral third party to evaluate what we were doing, instead of it just being like, how do we feel about it? So it was important for me to see how does this compare against something that was designed to tell us how we're doing in relation to these different aspects. So I thought the rubric was an excellent tool for not only evaluating an existing department, but using it as we were building a new advising center.
Great. Well, as your team used the rubric, how many were on your team, and what were some of the results? And maybe if you could tell us whether or not you found differences in terms of the results, whether there were similarities, and also a little bit more about some of the insights. We'll talk a little bit more in a bit.
Certainly. So what I did is I didn't want to skew the results, and we have a very small number of people. There were myself and 4 advisors at the time. And so I knew what I thought, but my opinion didn't matter in this. I wanted to get the views from the people who are actually doing the work. And so I only gave it to them, and then I averaged their scores. The thing that was most surprising to me is that something that I thought was very important, which is the pedagogy of critical thinking, was the thing that was the lowest rated from the group. And the reason was that we had talked about it. We had incorporated it into the things that we were doing, but we had never actually written it down and put it into policy. So when the means of delivery score was pretty high, that's because we incorporated those concepts into our flipped advising modules. So we felt that we were doing doing the right things there. And some of the statements were things like, we talk about this every day, but we didn't actually write it down anywhere. So
Right.
that got me as an administrator to really think about, wow, I need to get this written down someplace and
Mhm.
codified, because I really feel that things like policies, procedures, learning outcomes, educational kind of the point,
Right.
the philosophy you're using to build in this particular case an advising department. Those things need to live with the institution and with in our case the school, not with a person, because people leave. There's turnover, and as a matter of fact, I left not long after I gave the we used this rubric, and because I have this wonderful opportunity at NACADA, but so I was concerned that there would be a situation where, what if the associate dean leaves? The associate dean was very supportive of our efforts. The
Mhm.
director of student services, the dean himself, they were all very supportive of what we were trying to do, because advising was trying to teach the kind of the Mark Lowenstein
Mhm.
um, vision of helping students to make connections across the curriculum. And one of the big pieces that SCI is concerned with is polymathic education. And so we looked at advising as a way to help students make connections across the curriculum and understand the different their kind of evolving understanding of polymathy.
Right.
So we incorporated that into the modules as well. So there was very much a pedagogy of critical thinking incorporated into the modules, but we did not write it down anywhere. And so, like I said, the biggest concern was that people would leave, and then that effort would die with the people, even though it was very much embraced by the administrators and the advisors on staff at the time. I don't know if you have anything else to add there, Rachel.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree that was our big common thing, was we all valued this and thought it was an important thing to build into the fabric, because we had this really cool opportunity to build a brand new center. And so to incorporate these things from the get-go was really valuable for us, but to use this to make sure we were actually building it into the way the center was built and not just the values of the people there.
That's interesting. I think that when you look at it in that regard, it seems to me that what you're saying is that the rubric forced you to be explicit
Mhm.
about what is your curriculum, what are your learning outcomes, what are your ways you go about critical thinking. Because a
Mhm.
lot of times these things are either assumed intuitively,
Mhm.
or else they are stated, but they're more like aspirational type of goals as opposed to programmatic ones. And I
Mhm.
think we've all gotten caught up in that over periods of time where, it's a good idea and we just do it. And so that's certainly a little bit different. Well, when you looked at it in terms of the conversation that you had, was there just general agreement amongst your team about the results?
I think so.
Yeah, I think it became really clear, what we're talking about, in that the means of delivery was definitely our strongest area, and it seems like that consistently was everyone's strongest area, because in building the center, we had to focus very quickly. A quick priority was getting this first year seminar up and running.
Mhm.
So we had this really clear means of delivery where an advisor was working as an educator, and from the get-go, a student saw an advisor at the front of a classroom teaching them about critical thinking and how to make these connections. And so we were able to forge that association really quickly. But it just becomes clear that that's what we were able to focus on early on.
Okay,
So that's
great.
the beauty of it. Just to reiterate something Rachel said earlier, is that we introduced the flipped advising modules as units of their first year seminar. So that just to kind of emphasize that Rachel's point there, that the students saw their advisor as instructors.
Great.
And I don't know, Rachel, how did you feel as an advisor um, interacting with those first year students throughout the first year and now their second year,
Mhm.
as opposed to the students you had who didn't go through the first year seminar, sort of the legacy students before the merger? What
Mhm.
was your experience with them?
Absolutely. I think the expectations of the students were very different. The students who didn't go through that class were more focused on things like, degree requirements and what classes fulfill this, and kind of the more lower level planning stuff. Whereas with the students who went through the first year seminar and who then interact with these flipped advising modules after class, we have them do those things before they come to their advising appointment.
Mhm.
So that need is still there, but we address it through the learning management system before they come to us. So that piece is covered. They can come in and we can have a deeper conversation about, not so much what are you doing, but why.
That's great. It seems that to some extent, and just for clarification, is that you had the freshman seminar, but it was one in which it was a synchronous type of activity where the advisor met the students in a traditional type of classroom. And
Yes.
what you ended up by doing was to modify this by making it flipped, where you put synchronous and asynchronous components together to end up by working with students. So you had learning outcomes, you had a curriculum for the
Mhm.
course. Then what you started doing was to make it more programmatic. And you're trying to right now make it so that it covers all 4 years rather than just the
Mhm.
first year. Is that accurate in terms of an interpretation?
Yeah, exactly. The plan and the goal, this is something we are still pretty new, so we're still developing this. But ideally, they'll go through this first year seminar where that is just a typical synchronous class. We meet once a week for 50 minutes and we talk through these concepts, and then from there we roll them into a not for credit Canvas course. That's our learning management system, and there we upload a new module every semester and they'll interact with that before their advising appointment each semester because Pitt does have mandatory advising for all 4 years. So we can use that as a nice tool. So students will interact with the module. We take their registration hold off so they can go ahead and register for classes. And then they come to us at a later point to talk about just more reflection and why they're doing this. So we're still building out those pieces of what it looks like each semester. So far, we're in year 2. But the goal is that each module will get them to engage with learning outcomes that we'll develop, and they'll get more complex and more deep with time.
That's great. So it appears like what you've been doing here is that you decided to first tackle, addressing and making explicit what was going on.
Mhm.
You also were looking at, in terms of your goal, learning goals, developing the advising curriculum for the first year and moving onward. Is there anything else that from that rubric that looking at it that you set up as some priorities that you would like to do?
It became when we first used this, when Sean introduced it to us in the beginning, it like you said, it was clear that we needed to explicitly state these
Mhm.
goals and that this is something that we value. And then the next phase was really, what are we doing to demonstrate to students that we value this, and how do we get them to engage with it? So it really just made it clear that yes, we value this, and now we need to build the pieces to get them to do it. And so what kind of bubbled up for me when we analyzed these results was that we've got the learning outcomes started, we've got the curriculum started that exists in the early pieces, but what we still need to work on at this point is being more explicit in how we evaluate that they've met learning outcomes. We say, this is something we hope that you do, but we're not totally explicit yet in how we assess whether they've met that outcome.
Okay,
And then more of the opportunities for critical thinking outside of the classroom. Those are the pieces that we're still tackling next.
that's great. John?
I'd like to add another piece to this, and it's um, the COVID, right?
Mhm.
So we had this pandemic that you may be familiar with, and
Yes.
the interesting thing for me is when this happened, the students who were using the flipped modules
Mhm.
had something to hang on to. They had some piece of stability that went from March 5th,
Mhm.
Right,
then all of a sudden March 15th, you're
right.
gone. And so
Yeah.
what the students were doing is they were still interacting with their advisors through the flipped modules. And instead of walking down the hall or down the street in the
Mm.
freezing cold and having a meeting with their advisor, they were having their synchronous sessions through Zoom
Mhm.
at whatever time was convenient for them and the advisor. So what this did is it created, I was like, wow, at the time I thought, wow, I'm really glad we got these things built early because this gives the students some semblance of consistency throughout
Mhm.
their first semester, their first year. So I felt when that hit us at first, it didn't cause as much of a of course there was turmoil and there was
Mhm.
a lot of confusion and things like that. But this created some stability. It felt to me from my perspective. What do you think, Rachel? Did you feel that the students this helped the students kind of transition um, uh, better than they might have had we not built these modules?
Yeah, there wasn't this suddenly, because we weren't on campus, we weren't available, or they couldn't find us, because this online piece always existed. So we kind of still had them start with the Canvas piece, and then the advisor could comment on those, or set up an appointment from there. So yes, it still forwards that connection between us, even though we were in a different space.
That's great. I'm glad that it had that positive effect, because COVID hit us all, and I think that uh, many people in the field of advising were doing double time in order just to try to match and meet the needs of their students, and so I'm glad to hear that this was a beneficial side effect of going down this path. For recommendations, do you have anything to recommend to any institution that might want to use this rubric to start the process of looking at their program as a way of beginning some type of program assessment?
I would say that not just the raw values, but the comments on each of the scales were really, really valuable for me. Because of course, for means of reporting and comparison, the raw numbers are valuable, but really encouraging space for comments under each of the scales to say, why did you pick that score? What do you think we're strong in this area? What do you think our weaknesses are? And being able to get a little more granular with it was valuable. So I would definitely say encouraging those comments was a helpful piece for us.
Good. Sean, anything?
I think so too, and I think what was really helpful for me was that this gave us a structure for conversations to have about where we want to go. And one thing that I really appreciated was the honesty and the transparency of the advisors who submitted this. And this also showed me how much they value doing this work. How much they value. Of course, they want to work with the students. Find me an advisor who doesn't want to work with a student,
Right.
but they, of course, they're interested in those one-on-one connections. But the advisors were finding value in building the modules and building them based on the kind of the principles of this rubric. So I think that this helped me also not only helped to develop conversations and give us structure and consistency. It also helped me with professional development. It helped me to help the advisors get deeper into the pillar documents and see kind of really the components of the pillars, why they're important, and to see how you apply those to practice. Because essentially everybody in our center were brand new advisors. We had one person who had a couple of years experience, but everybody else was brand new. So this was also an excellent professional development tool. So it served really multiple purposes for us. I don't know if you have anything to add more to that, Rachel.
No, I think you hit it on the head. It gave us, as being new advisors, it gave us kind of a framework for where we should be. We may not have had that had we not had this baseline to look at, understanding what we need to assess. So to have these categories to be able to more specifically engage with where we're strong and where we're weak was really helpful in learning what an advising center should look like, and what ours looked like and what we needed to improve in.
That's excellent. Well, do you have any last words or comments to folks?
I would say that yes, it's worth it. It is worth the time and investment it takes to build these things. One of the professors at Pitt, who we worked with very closely, Daniel Mosé, who's also now an NACADA research grant awardee, he tells us the story about that he heard in Brazil. He said there's a story about this guy who carries around a bicycle with a flat tire. And people ask him, why don't you get on that tire? Why don't you get on that bike and ride it? Well, the tire's flat. Well, he said, well, fix the tire and ride the bike. You'll get there faster. And so that kind of story is what flipped advising is for me. It really helps to make advising more efficient and more effective. And what's people like me who've been around advising for a long time and came into advising when it would look very different than it does now. I feel just elated that we have a whole new generation of advisors coming in, and the first thing they're thinking about is how are we going to assess student learning outcomes. That was not the focus of advising when I started back in 2001. So this shows me that the progression and the not to toot your horn for you, George, but I'm going to toot it because of the work you've done, and you gave us this structure. You came in, you helped us build this. I think this was the work that you've done is going to have some legs and really help to advance the field.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's fun. It's always fun working with, dedicated advisors and administrators who want to push the boundaries. And
Yeah, yeah, I think
Yeah.
we're lucky to be in that kind of field where we
absolutely.
want
we
to,
can
this is
share.
stuff we'd want to do anyway. Yeah.
Or we can share.
Yep,
Yes.
absolutely.
Well, excellent. Anything else, Rachel?
No, I would just agree that absolutely it's worth it, and it makes your work so much more efficient and the conversations feel more meaningful. And so to take the rubric is a great starting piece to understand what your needs are, how do you get the legs under your center so that you can do this work. And then once it's in place, just in the couple of modules we have so far, being able to have students think about these things, the lower level things on their own, and then come to us for that deeper learning. It really positions advising as a space for education, and it's such a positive thing, and the rubric is a great starting point for that. So absolutely, It's worth it.
Well, I want to thank you both for taking time this morning to talk with me about how you used the rubric and your experiences with it and your recommendations to everyone. So again, thank you, and I look forward to being in touch with you both.